Mr. Paul Barker. He's from the United States initially, but currently lives in Istanbul, Turkey. He has his BA, similar to myself, in history, as well as an MA in cross-cultural studies from Northland International University in Wisconsin. He's now in the thesis stage for his MA in International Relations at the Fatih University here in Istanbul. His particular area of interest is the convergence of religion and politics in international affairs. The topic of his paper today is Turkish religious identity and the question of European Union membership. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming J. Paul Barker. Thank you.
All right. Well, I would like to begin by thanking all of you for coming to this conference and also sticking around to the very end. And also want to thank the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for giving me this opportunity. And I'd like to begin with a few caveats. Some of the other participants have also made similar statements. You notice from my introduction, I'm neither Turkish nor European, so I come to this topic as somewhat of an outsider, which brings with it certain negatives as far as familiarity with the topic, but also perhaps a different perspective, which sometimes can be beneficial. Also, I'm quite young, and I'm quite aware of that fact, and so as I talk about this issue, I realize that many of these developments are definitely predate my own presence, and so recognize that I'm speaking somewhat from a matter of ignorance, but I hope to raise some of my own observations and put them forward on this topic, which I think is one that the things we're doing here, talking about cultural diplomacy, those things that matter most to us, in this issue of the Turkish and EU membership, furthering that discussion, I think would be quite beneficial. So I want to begin by just making you aware of the scope of this paper. It's limited to the role of religion and identity, and it's not investigating other factors. The question of Turkey and EU membership, there's a whole host of considerations that go into this discussion, and I'm aware of that, and so want to make explicit that it's limited in its scope. Thinking back to the first day, the presentation by the ambassador of Croatia, as he was summarizing Croatia's membership, he was able to do it rather succinctly over a period of 15 or 20 years, and the Turkish story is much longer, going back to, as was shared this morning, back to 1959 and initial application to the European community. The goal of this paper is to examine how religious identity relates to the question of EU accession. And I want to just begin with a starting point that religion matters. It's an important part of shaping individuals, cultures, and has an influence on global politics. And as I've been talking with some of the other participants here, there's some who also share that view, and it's somewhat in contrast to prevailing trends from within academics, within philosophy, from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, even up until the middle of the 20th century, and the idea of the secularization thesis that combined with modernization thesis, building on the theories of Marx and Weber and Kant and Durkheim and other philosophers that saw, perhaps to put it in the words of Nietzsche, and then Martin Heidegger's comment on that when he states that God is dead and we have killed him. And then Heidegger comments on that he was saying that religion in the modern society, it will lose its influence as a force giving meaning. And I think the current events would all speak to the contrary, that religion does still matter, and the idea that a radical secularism, completely free of religion, is necessary for modern democracy, it does not mesh with the reality globally, and then looking even within Western democracies, what some have considered the bastion of secularism, drawing on the work of Alfred Steppen in an article from 2010. He looks at 4 different religion and state arrangements within Western democracies. And a lot of attention is given to the first one, the separatist trend, which is what's seen in France, in my home country, the United States, what was adopted and modified in the Turkish context. But then you also look at countries that we would all consider democracies that have actually a state-established religion, what's seen in Denmark, Norway, the United Kingdom, other democracies that have a principle of positive accommodation, in Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland, and then another concept that I'm still thinking through and developing in my own understanding, the idea of respect all, positive cooperation, principled distance that's seen in India, Indonesia, Senegal, and others. And all of this is just to say that this idea that religion needs to be completely removed and the government's involvement in religion there has to be a complete wall of separation doesn't actually mesh with reality. And also want to cite Jonathan Fox's 2008 survey where he's looking at the government involvement in religion. And as he looks at this variable across a number of different areas, he comes to the conclusion that only 4 of the 27 Western governments neither endorse or are hostile towards religion. And all of this, and just to summarize it, it's that the institutional arrangement is not what matters for, in regards to religion and state. That's not what matters in a democracy, but there's certain baseline commitments that are present within these democratic countries. And I'll try to summarize those baseline commitments under 2 headings. The first is a safeguarding of the principle of autonomy of using both church and state, but in the Turkish context, you could talk about the mosque and state, but the safeguarding of religious actors and the state. And this is the idea that the state is free to operate without direct interference from religious communities. There's not direct pressure, there's not direct influence by the religious communities on the state. And then at the same time, there's also a freedom for religious communities that are free to operate without direct interference from the state. Again, using Alfred Steppen's label of twin tolerations, this freedom for the state to operate and in a way that allows it to govern all of its people, both of a majority religion, minority religions, and individuals of no religious belief whatsoever. And then the second commitment is a freedom of religion and conscience, and that's that the individuals of any majority, minority, or no belief, no religious belief at all, are short of their constitutional liberties. Their rights are ensured according to the law, regardless, and there's no limitations of that. And this includes both a freedom of exercise and a freedom of expression. And so it's these, from my understanding, it's these commitments more so than a particular arrangement of institutions that's the hallmark of secularism within Western democracies. When we turning our attention to the Turkish context, and I know that I'm speaking from a very limited experience, and there's others in the room who can give much more in-depth analysis, but to summarize it, you can look at, and it was mentioned this morning as the minister was giving a very detailed interaction of the history of France's relationship with the United States and the close interaction they had during the time of the founding. And the French style of secularism is wherein the state is protected from religion, the idea of laicism, versus the Anglo-American tradition where it's the opposite concern is a priority of religion is protected from the state. In the Turkish context, it seems that the principle was adopted, building on definitely influenced by the French system, but based in the particular context with the different challenges that were being faced, it was a religion was controlled by the state, and there's a number of different reforms that you see throughout the early period of the Republic, and then looking at the historical development, and to summarize from 1923 to the present in a couple of sentences is nearly impossible, but there's shifts in the aims and objectives of religious actors, and you can look at, to categorize it, different approaches were taken from a liberal view, a liberal stand that kind of emerged within the center-right parties, to more of an ascetic withdrawing from public life, and then more of a engaged Islamist, and want to define that term because I don't want it to be thrown around, but an idea that the state should be based explicitly based on religious principles. There was a small trend within that movement, but there was, over time, from the opening of the political system to a multi-party system after the Second World War to the present, there's a shift in the aims and objectives. And within all of them, it seems that it's not the idea of a secular state that was ever challenged, but it's what that meaning of secularism is that's been a contested term. And to bring it to the modern context, there seems to be an increasing role of religion, not just in practice, but in influence. And this is, I think, both a trend globally, but also particularly within Turkey. And this table I have here cites research from a Pew Global Attitudes Project in 2010, looking at answering the question of how much of a role do you think religion plays in political life? And that number of individuals who felt it plays a large role has increased by 25% over from 2002 to 2010. But what's interesting is that at the same time as this study, the question of the idea of a religious state, a state founded on religion, that number, which already was quite low, has decreased to, I believe it's 6% from a 2006 study. So religion's playing an increasing role, but not in terms of the religious activity of the state. The second area that I want to look at, and wish I had more time to develop more of these ideas, is in terms of the religious freedom, or the way in which the Turkish secularism meshes with the ideas, those base commitments that I talked about within secular democracies. And the tables you have in front of you, it looks at the composite religious freedom indexes, and it's Turkey contrasted with the world average, and then also the 5 largest countries within the European Union, just for comparison's sake. And you see in terms of government regulation, Turkey has the highest figure at 5.1. In terms of favoritism, it's quite high, higher than the world average. Spain has scored higher in terms of favoritism. In terms of social regulation of religion, it's again quite high. And basically just showing that the figures support the conclusion that Turkey continues to have a controlling policy towards religion. To just turn very briefly to the conception of EU identity, and then I'll bring these together and make a few conclusions right at the end and kind of show just a few observations, a couple directed towards Turkey and a couple directed towards the EU. In terms of conception of the EU identity, we can look at it at the development from an economic partnership, the coal and steel membership community that was established in the 1950s, and then how that's developed to the present. And you have this idea of not just an economic partnership, but common values, and then also democratic credentials, or the EU as a normative power. But in what way can we speak of a European identity? And to summarize this in a label used in a study that looks at this actually empirically, they use the idea of a thick or a thin identity. there's other labels as a post-national and national identity. But just to summarize it, a thick identity is this idea of what constitutes Europe is shared cultural identity. This is sometimes what's labeled a Christian Europe or a common historical background. In essence, European identity is limited to certain factors versus a thin European identity that's based on shared principles and values, the rule of law, human rights, democracy, in essence a universal or a more open concept of European identity. And so there's this question and two different conceptions about either being European versus becoming European, and which one of these is actually the case. And I believe it's the sociologist Jose Casanova who talks about that there's already this debate existing within Europe itself, and then when you bring in the question of Turkish membership, it bubbles back up to the surface and makes it quite an important issue. And so I have just 4 conclusions that I think are quite important in terms of Turkey's religious identity and European Union membership. And the first is directed towards the EU, and this idea that there needs to be a clarification of identity as either limited or universal. And as if the question remains kind of unclarified, there won't be really any ability for the conversation to move forward. If in fact it is a limited membership, a limited idea, this thick membership, that allows the shift beyond simply a member versus a non-member discussion to other spheres of influence. And so a question, an observation directed towards the European Union is there's this need for the clarification of their identity. A conclusion directed towards Turkey is in terms of a strengthening of a commitment to religious freedom. And this isn't in terms of necessarily an institutional arrangement, but in terms of these commitments to religious freedom, these values that secure the separate domains of authority. And this will take place in areas such as the Constitution, educational venues, within institutions such as the Diyanet and the representation of religious minorities in that context, and showing that that Turkey, as a Muslim country, has these same commitments to a secure secular state, but also free religious activity. And then another important one directed towards the EU is a clarification of the enlargement capacity and criteria, and whether it will be based on compliance with the acquis and the Copenhagen criteria, whether if these reforms are met, then Turkey will be free to join, or if it will be based on popular opinion, if it will be put to a referendum. And so this is an important clarification that needs to be made. And then a final conclusion directed towards Turkey is the internalization of needed reforms irrespective of EU membership. The Polish ambassador was talking in terms of how they were able to make such reforms so quickly. And one of the questions directed at him, he responded with that we had this need to put our own house in order. We needed to make these reforms, and whether there's membership or not wasn't the issue. And that same idea, this internalization of reforms, is quite important, and quite aware of the observation that the former foreign minister made this morning about the importance of EU membership for securing the reforms that have been made over the last 8 to 10 years, and how that is an important part. But I just wanted to bring this issue up, which I know, and try and summarize it for you quite briefly, and hopefully facilitate some discussion on this topic where cultural diplomacy, understanding those values that define us as individuals and as cultures and as nations and as states, is quite important. So we just wanted to bring that before you and present my ideas, and hopefully through your questions and observations, grow in my own understanding and thinking. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Questions and comments? Who would like to go first? Excellent presentation. There we go. We'll start on the side. Okay.
Thank you very much. Rudolf Schulik, I'm PhD candidate of International Relations from Slovakia as well as now at ICD. I'm very much interested in this topic, and I would like to thank you for your interesting presentation. And my question is, since there are multiple reasons which are used as justification by EU or European states why Turkey should not become member of the EU, how important is actually the question of religion? Because there are also some political matters, economic matters, other maybe matters of power when you compare, for example, position of France, possible position of Turkey. So where would you put this question of religion? Is it more important than these other issues or less? And if these other issues could be solved, would it be possible that Turkey will be denied just because of religious identity? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for your question. I don't know that I'm definitely not an expert on the issue, but in my opinion, I feel like this identity issue, as that's clarified within Europe itself, and I hope and think that this idea of shared values will be embraced, or a more thin conception. It will, in some ways, decrease the obstacle that religious identity might face, and that I don't think that the Islamic nature of Turkey is what ultimately could stand in the way. I think that the term, the freedom and the religious freedom is versus repression. That term, or that area of religious identity is what is more important. So I'm not a very clear answer to your question, but my opinion.
You hear one more question?
Thank you very much, Carsten Paludan-Müller from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural and Heritage Research. I liked your presentation. It was food for thought. But I have a few comments on the fact side. In Sweden, there's already been a secession between state and church. So there's no longer a state church in Sweden. In Norway and Denmark, it's being discussed whether it's time for a separation now, exactly because now there are many citizens who do not share the Christian belief, belong to other communities like the Islam, the growing Islamic communities. So it might not be appropriate anymore to have a state church which just sort of accepts one particular belief. So things are changing, in fact.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, final question.
Ibrahim Anlı, Journalists and Writers Foundation. Sorry. During the candidacy negotiations of Turkey with the EU in late 2004, there were more Arab journalists in Brussels than Turkish journalists, making a total of 500 people trying to cover the negotiations. So I'd like to connect try to highlight the connection between the Turkish experience and the ongoing Arab Spring. Turkey has made significant progress in terms of recognizing different religious groups, different denominations, and offering recognition. Now, a reform for Diyanet is being discussed. Church properties, confiscated properties are being given back. All those anti-democratic practices are being abandoned. And what I'd like to highlight is that it is important to give the relevant merit and recognition to that progress in order to it's a good way to communicate with the Arab world as they face the challenge of now intra-communal harmony, dealing with minorities, dealing with religious, ethnic identities that are now emerging after authoritarian regimes. So, in a way, recognizing the merit, the progress of the Turkish experience, which is not perfect, of course, might be a very powerful message to the new Arab leadership, and it is free of the risk of being a patronizing fashion. That comment I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, and I think the observation you make is quite important. That as Turkey continues to demonstrate that you can be both Muslim and respectful of religious freedom, and Europe responds to that and shows that they support free and democratic countries that respect human rights regardless of their religious identity, that will be a powerful statement to other countries that they truly do respect freedom and democracy for all people, not just for specific religious or historical or ethnic background. So thank you for that observation.
I would like to share my observation also. It's not a question. After having served 40 years in diplomacy and 10 years in politics, I was led to the conclusion that on both international relations and domestic politics, determinism, that's to say, to guess the outcome of something is very difficult, because it is a composition, it is very complex, and it is composed of several elements, and you cannot draw the same conclusion even if the circumstances and elements are the same in one case as compared to another case. In the first case, the conclusion may be different, the outcome may be different from the second one. And in politics now, regarding the relations between Turkey and the European Union, there are so many elements that enters into the play. Leaders, the public opinion of the respective countries, member countries who are going to decide, and economic relations, the economic stakes of companies, private companies of that country, and among them religion, altogether play a role, and one cannot reduce, first of all, the outcome to one or two reasons, plus lack of determinism in social sciences play also a role, and the same circumstances may not lead to the same conclusion in different circumstances. So it's not it's a combination of millions of probabilities. They say that in chess game, in the third moves, you choose out of 1.5 million possibilities. And in Turkey's accession process, it will be something like this. Turkey will choose 1 out of 1.5 million possibilities or more, and plus you have to multiply this with 27 countries. By that time, it will be 35 countries which will decide on Turkey's entry. So it's a combination of all these things that has to be taken into consideration, rather than simplifying it, or as we have listened yesterday, to arithmetic formulas, etc. It's very difficult, because even if you develop formulas like this, after all, it is you who will give E1 what value it is it's a human being. It is subjective assessment of yours which counts. So it's very difficult. So one cannot predict on this basis. It will be the circumstances at that time, or the constellation, that's to say the order of the stars in the sky, that will determine the prospect of Turkey's accession, in my opinion.
Yes, those are very wise words.
All right, well, on that note, I'd ask you all to please join me in thanking J. Paul Barker. Thank you.